Our first is, and Ed Powell will be presenting how do you pronounce Thrain, anyway. And, okay, so he'll tell you all about that in a few minutes. Dr. Ed Powell has a BS in physics from Carnegie Mellon University and an MA and PhD in astrophysics and concentration in plasma physics and controlled thermonuclear fusion from Princeton University. And those of you who don't know how to add, you may bow. Okay, he works in his defense software industry, concentrating on large-scale systems inoperability, and lives with his wife Sharon and 2 European Burmese cats, Aristotle and Alexander, in Fairfax, Virginia. Ed and Sharon enjoy reading together, auditing Mythmoot classes, pampering the kitties, and traveling when they get the chance. Okay, now this paper actually discusses pronunciation issues because Thrain, or however you want to pronounce it, is actually pronounced many different ways, so we will be demystified. Yes? Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I did pass out some handouts, and of course I printed fewer than were necessary, apparently, because I couldn't imagine this many people caring. And I also produced slides and requested a projector. That didn't happen. So I brought my own projector and requested a screen. That didn't happen. And then I'm going to play audio for you, and so I forgot to bring speakers. And so I went out and bought speakers last night, which didn't end up having a power supply. So this is just typical of one of my talks. So we're going to.
Should we be worried about this chandelier?
And those of you, fire exits are there. And if there's an earthquake, stand in the doorway.
You're being sabotaged by the phantom of the Mythmoot.
The phantom of the Mythmoot, exactly. So. The genesis of this talk was the fact that those of you who listen to Riddles in the Dark, you know Riddles in the Dark? There are 4 hosts, and they pronounce this name 4 different ways. And I think that's preposterous. I mean, they should at least figure out how to pronounce it. And so we're not talking about the character in the movie, of course. The character in the movie is named Thrain. That's what they decided, and that's what he's called, which they still didn't say. But we want to talk about how do you pronounce the actual name from the book, and there is conflicting evidence. So if you go to the first slide, it's spelled 2 different ways, right? I mean, in the Hobbit, it's spelled Thrain, and in the Lord of the Rings, it's Thra with an accent on it, In, and no one can decide how to pronounce that name. So we'll look into it a little bit because the evidence is not as clear as one might think. So if we go to the next slide, the vowels slide, we all learned in first grade, at least I learned in first grade. I don't know whether you guys learned, some of you may actually have had an education, but I learned that there are things like the short A, like in hat, and the long A, like in hate or fate. Okay? That's what vowels are, and the short I in kid and the long I in kite. That, of course, is totally, completely wrong. Because when we learned French or Spanish, we found out that the vowels are pronounced differently in French and Spanish, and the A is pronounced as in father. So in French, it's ah. A is ah. Now, what is ah in English, right? It's short O, right? Short O, ah, like in hot, right? But that's A in Spanish. And I is pronounced as in machine, E, I is an E. Of course, the E in English is the long E, right? So how did that happen, right? So the French or Spanish vowels are like the vowels in Middle English and Old French, which are the sort of precursors to modern English. And why is this different? And that is because something happened called the Great Vowel Shift from 1350 to 1700. But sort of Shakespeare time is kind of when the English-speaking peoples decided to pronounce all vowels differently. There was a big conference. No, there wasn't. It was just something that happened naturally. And I've done some investigation of this. Nobody really knows why. Why do people start pronouncing vowels differently, right? And I don't exactly know. Those of you who've been to Southern California can teenagers there pronounce everything sort of weirdly, differently. The whole Valley girls speak. That's for real. I married them. And,
I grew up in it.
yes, exactly. And so this language change just happens. One of the funny things from the conference was somebody said the elves' language changes too fast because there's no generational change in the elves, and that's true. And of course, the Mannish language changes too slow in Tolkien, right? Because, like, think of the language change that's happened in English over the last 400 or 500 years, and then imagine, like, Agenaic, it's 7,000 years, and it's pretty much, you know, the same. So it's funny because Tolkien was brilliant and he knew all this, but he just didn't quite do the language change quite right in the books. So next slide, diphthongs. Two adjacent vowel sounds occurring within the same syllables. So many of the vowels that we know and love, like long A is not a vowel. A is not a vowel. And if you say fate, and look at your tongue while you're doing the A. It goes from the A to the E, A. That's the way a diphthong works in vowel sounds. And I didn't put the references in here, but I did in the paper version. All I know about linguistics comes from a guy by the name of John McWhorter, who has done a number of really brilliant teaching company courses on linguistics that I highly recommend. He's a brilliant lecturer, and he gives great examples, and he's funny as hell. So I do recommend those. So if you look at I, like hot, and then E, I, right? I is not a vowel, it's a diphthong. And so if you spell A in the International Phonetic Alphabet, it comes out in this little squiggly thing, which you can see here with the little E. So why is it E, right? Well, what's E in French, right? What's E? It's right? And then I is E. A. That's kind of, and they put a little thing under it. So that's kind of why they spell it that way in IPA. So you have to understand what vowels are and what diphthongs are before we go to the next slide, where we talk about Tolkien's rules from the Lord of the Rings in Appendix E. And I know I'm not going to read this. You can read this, but basically he goes and says, well, A is pronounced as the A is in father, so it's ah. That's what it is. And I is pronounced as machine. It's E. And he talks about the diphthongs, and we know about AU is owl, as like in loud, right? Smaug, not smog, right? We all know that. The stress is on the first part there are two vowels in the diphthong. The stress is on the first one. So AI is pronounced like in rye, I, right? So it's the long I. And then he talks about accents. Long vowels are usually marked with an acute accent, as in some varieties of Fëanorian script. Sindarin, the long vowels are stressed, vowel symbols are marked with a circumflex. Next slide. So it's obvious, right? So that name is pronounced Thrain, right? No. No, see, that's the problem, is that Tolkien's directions apply to words derived from Sindarin and Quenya, not for names derived from other languages. And that name, the name we're talking about, is not Quenya or Sindarin, but it's an anglicization, oh, I can't even say that, of the name. And then I show it there. I would have pointed it on the screen that I don't have using the projector I don't have, with a little kind of phi-y, sort of half phi. And it comes from the Dvergatal, which is the list of dwarves in the Elder Edda, the prophecy of the seers called the Luspa. And that's where he got all of the names. But the name is not that name. It's an anglicization of that name. Many of the names in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are anglicized and are pronounced using a modern English pronunciation. So, we do not say Bilbo. Bilbo. We do not say Samwise. Do we say Samwise or do we say Samwise, right?
It would be more fun.
So, Samwise. So, yeah, so he doesn't follow Appendix E for all his names, right? He follows them for the Quenya and Cinderin names. He doesn't follow them for the anglicized names. He follows English for the anglicized names. So I show you on the next 2 pages extracts from the Elder Edda, the Jörgertal, and the Younger Edda. And I apologize since I printed it 2 up because it was just a catastrophe at the machine last night because Dave was trying to print his stuff and I was running out of paper, and so I decided to print 2 up so we can get stuff. But you can see a lot of the names that we know and love. Gandalf and Thorin and Thror and Killian Fundin and whatnot, Rowan, Eikenskaldi, I always love Eikenskaldi, are both in the Elder Edda, which is on this page, and the Prose Edda, which is the next page. The Elder Edda is from about 1,000 and the Prose Edda is about from 12-ish hundred. Now these pages were reproduced from Doug Anderson's The Annotated Hobbit, which I know many of you have, but those of you who don't have, it's a great little resource for things. So we go on to the next part. Now the next part is the next epic fail of the talk, and that is listening to Tolkien pronounce Thorin and Company's names, because which of course none of you are going to hear because this is the speakers don't work. I'm just going to use the laptop. I'm going to play it anyway, and then I'm going to tell you what he actually says, which I have written down. So let's see how awful this is. All right, we'll play it one more time.
Turn it so the speakers are facing us.
I don't even know where the speakers are on this MacBook Air, but I'll turn it this way and see if it does any better. And those of you who can, I can try and make this available on the internet for people who really want to do it. It's in the 75th anniversary edition of the Hobbit ebook, if you use it on a reader like an iPad, which all I did was I put my iPad down and started playing. I put my iPhone next to it and start recording, and that's how I got it, because I couldn't figure out how to rip the sound directly, so I did it the old-fashioned analog way. One more time. Okay, so what did we hear in that? We said Dwalin and Balin, rhyming with Jimmy Fallon. Not Dwalin and Balin, but Dwalin and Balin, and Philly and Killy. Philly and Killy. They did that in the movie. Did you notice that in the movie? Yeah. They said Philly and Killy instead of Philly and Killy. We all have said Philly and Killy since we've been little teeny Hobbit readers, but no, that's not the way Tolkien pronounces it. It's Philly and Killy. Now he does say Owen and Glowin, right? So the people who say Owen and Gloin, they're not doing it the way Tolkien did it. Now, Beefer and Bofer, right? No. Biffer and Boffer. Now, who would have thought that those dwarves' names were pronounced Biffer and Boffer? At least, we all have our opinions, but this is Tolkien's opinion. He wrote it. So he says Biffer and Boffer. But with Bomber, he does it in the Appendix E, most Appendix E-ized way. It's Bambur, Bambur, which is exactly kind of what Appendix E would tell you with the rolling R's and the or sound. So it's Bambur. So that's not at all what I expected. Unfortunately, if we go to the next slide, what did we learn? Unfortunately, Tolkien does not pronounce the name of Thorin's father in any extant recording, at least the ones that I can find. I'm pretty sure I have every recording that Tolkien has ever made. I mean, he did do that talk in Amsterdam that none of us have heard yet. except that one guy. And so when that gets put out, we'll hear that, but they have to clean up the audio. But all the other recordings have been put out, and I've listened to all of them, and I don't think he's pronounced the name. But there is no consistency in the pronunciation of the dwarfs' names. They do not follow the rules in Lord of the Rings Appendix E. The original name, however, and you can see it right there, is Old Norse, and the accented A in Old Norse, I looked this up, is pronounced as owl in loud. I didn't know that. Who knew that? And when Tolkien added accent marks to many of the dwarves' names in the Lord of the Rings, for instance, I gave you a sentence there where it talks about Thrain and his son. What does that mean? What does it really mean? How does Thror with an accent pronounced differently than Thror without an accent? I mean, what does that mean? What made him put the accent over Thror? Now, I understand kind of Glowin, right? We understand Glowin, right? Because, okay, we want to mark the OI as not a diphthong. But is that what he's doing? Is he's marking the AI in Thorin's father's name as not a diphthong? Is that, that may be what he's doing. But it's hard to tell because, I mean, differ, right? How do you know? The other thing is, as we know, Tolkien had ample chance to re-edit The Hobbit. In fact, he did it a bunch of times, and yet he did not re-accent all the names in The Hobbit. So we've come to the point where we can even say the name in The Hobbit is different than the name in The Lord of the Rings, right? If you look at The Hobbit just as an individual work, which is kind of what Corey tells us to do, right? Look at The Hobbit just as it stands. The name in The Hobbit could be different than the name in The Lord of the Rings. Or if you look at it from an authorial perspective, Tolkien changed his mind. Potentially. Potentially. It was pronounced one way in 1937, and then back in 1960, when he's revising it, maybe it was pronounced another way. So I think we go to the choices and rationale slide. I think there's a bunch of different possibilities for how to pronounce this name. Obviously, Thrain, which is what they used in the movie, and the rationale for that is it's the standard English pronunciation of a name that has obviously been anglicized. Thráin, of course, is the Appendix E version. Thráin, well, that's the owl comes from Old Norse, and it's a possibility. You never know. Thráin, that's where you say, okay, I'm putting that accent in to make sure it's not a diphthong. Thráin, right, is the Appendix E, right? Thráin is the Appendix E kind of pronunciation of the A, and not a diphthong. Thráin and Thráin and Thráin are obviously the Appendix E taken completely literally, right? Because the I is in machine, right? So it's E, right? And then, possibly some other. So what I did was I crowdsourced the answer to this. I sent out a survey to us. Maybe some of you answered it. And we'll see what actually happens. I think the next slide, we're going to talk about Corey. So Corey did a podcast on July 6th where he made the case that all names should be pronounced according to the guide in Appendix E, whether Elvish or not. Well, that's clearly just wrong. And in fact, I don't know whether I was driving. I couldn't have been driving, or I would have crashed into somebody. But I was so mad because it's obviously not true. I mean, it's not Bilbo Baggins and Pippin and Samwise and Thorin and Gollum. And my favorite, oh my God, my favorite, of course, it's Gandalf. 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 And we know it's not Gandalf because we have Tolkien saying Gandalf. But if you look at Appendix E, F is always V. Final F is always V. So it's Gandalf. And so none of those are true. And so we can't pronounce every name like Appendix E. And that's just wrong. Now, Corey says, well, he thinks Thráin. That's his thing. Well, now that's an odd choice, really, because the A in Thráin is not a vowel. It is itself a diphthong. And that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? So you're going to have an anglicized long A and then followed by a short E. I don't know whether that makes any sense to me. I don't know whether that makes logical sense. It might be true. We don't know how he did it. Corey argues from the parallels from Owen and Glowen. Owen and Glowen, Thrain. That's his argument from analogy. But linguistically, I don't think that necessarily works. Why would the A with an accent ever be pronounced like the modern long A, diphthong, A? I think consistency would lead to Thráin. But of course, that's an argument for The Lord of the Rings, not from The Hobbit. And those are two different books written many years apart. And it's hard to say, it's hard for me to say that Thráin is the right answer either. So if we go to the final slide, we have the poll of Mythgard students, 90 respondents. You can see the answer, Thrain. I think the question was, I should have reproduced the question if I was actually doing this talk properly. And the question was, how do you pronounce it? And so I think Thrain comes in first, and Thrain, and Thráin, and Thráin. And none of the owls are pronounced, nobody pronounces it with the owl, because let's be honest, nobody knows that Old Norse, A with an accent means owl. So since nobody knows that except one really, really obscure guy on YouTube, then it's hard to expect people to do it. But I put it in completeness. So I didn't put it on the slide. So what's my opinion? My opinion is, I think that either Corey's right and it's Thrain in parallel with Owen and Glowen. Of course, there's no evidence for this. And it doesn't make linguistic sense, but none of the others make linguistic sense either. Biffer doesn't make sense, right? Offer doesn't make sense. Philly doesn't make sense, right? So it's perfectly okay if Thrain doesn't make sense and it's parallel. So that could be true. It also could be true that it's Thrain, and I say that because he had the chance to re-edit it and he didn't, and so he might have done it that way. I don't know. He might have changed his mind over the years. He might have tried to fix things, to retcon things, like he's the master retconner, and I don't really know what he was trying to do in the Lord of the Rings when he added those accent marks to Thror, to this name, to Thorin's cousin's name, and I don't know what exactly he was trying to do. It certainly seems like it would be Thráin and Dain based on Appendix E, but that's without the accent. And what does the accent do? Does it diphthongify it, or does it, or is it just decoration like in Thror? I mean, let's be honest, the accent in Thror is just decoration, right? So you were all hoping to come to a talk and have me tell you how this name is pronounced, and I'm going to say I don't really know, but I've given you sort of the options and the poll of other Mythgard students, and I think we're going to have to leave it at that. So thank you very much.